In October of 1967, along a quiet stretch of Northern California known as Bluff Creek, a man named Roger Patterson was riding horseback with a rented 16mm camera. Patterson wasn't a scientist, he wasn't a filmmaker. He was, by most accounts, a rodeo rider with a long standing interest in reports of something large and human like said to roam the forests of the Pacific Northwest. That afternoon, something stepped out of the trees. It was tall, it walked upright, its arms swung with an oddly human rhythm, and just before disappearing back into the forest, it turned briefly and looked directly at the camera. The resulting footage lasts less than a minute. More than 50 years later, it remains one of the most analyzed, debated, and controversial pieces of film in history. Not because it's blurry, not because it's unclear, but because no one can agree on what it shows. That footage didn't appear in a vacuum. Long before cameras even existed, stories of large, upright beings living at the edge of civilization were told across cultures, from the Sasquatch of the Pacific Northwest to the Yeti of the Himalayas to the Yowie of Australia. These stories persist across geography, language, and time. And that raises a difficult question. If these encounters are all mistakes or hoaxes, why do they follow such similar patterns? And if they're not, what exactly are people encountering? And why does the evidence always seem to stop just short of certainty? From a scientific perspective, Bigfoot presents a problem, not because the idea is strange, but because the evidence is inconsistent. Over the decades, researchers and enthusiasts have collected thousands of reports, photographs, recordings, and physical samples. Some of the most frequently cited evidence comes from footprint casts, large impressions, often showing mid-foot flexibility and dermal ridges, features that are difficult to fake consistently. A handful of primatologists have noted that certain casts show pressure patterns inconsistent with known animals, though critics argue these features could be artifacts of soil conditions or deliberate hoaxes. Hair samples have also been analyzed. Many turn out to be bear, deer, or even human. Others remain unidentified, not because they're exotic, but because degraded samples often lack enough genetic material to classify conclusively. Science is very good at telling us what something is. It's much less comfortable telling us what something might have been. Audio recordings, including the so called Sierra sounds, have been analyzed for linguistic patterns, with some researchers suggesting non human vocal structures. Skeptics counter that trained humans are capable of producing remarkably strange noises. And then there's the fossil problem. Large primates require breeding populations. Breeding populations leave bones. Bones fossilize. And North America has yielded no confirmed fossil evidence of a giant hominid species surviving into modern times. From this angle, Bigfoot doesn't look mysterious, it looks unlikely, which is why most scientists place the phenomenon somewhere between misidentification, folklore, and cultural storytelling. And if Bigfoot were simply an undiscovered animal, that might be the end of the story. But there's another way to approach this problem, one that doesn't start by asking what animal Bigfoot might be. Instead, it starts by asking a different question entirely. What if not all intelligences interact with reality in the same way? In the early 1980s, the Law of One material emerged and it attempted to describe reality as layered, not just physically, but perceptually. In this framework, consciousness isn't produced by matter, matter is shaped by consciousness. Which, to be fair, already puts us slightly outside of the comfort zone of most biology textbooks. When Bigfoot encounters are viewed through this lens, the contradictions don't disappear, but they begin to organize themselves. According to the Law of One, there are three types of Bigfoot, and the first one we're starting off with a doozy. The first group did not even originate on Earth. These entities are described as survivors of a prior planetary civilization, one that reached technological advancement but ultimately destroyed itself through warfare. You may have heard of the planet Maldek in other circles, and actually, we will have a future episode that discusses the history of our solar system to include what happened to this lost planet. In the aftermath of the destruction of Maldek, consciousness from that world was extremely traumatized and needed to undergo a sort of review of what had occurred. These entities are working their understanding complexes through a series of what you would call karmic restitutions. They dwell within your deeper underground passageways. Think less missing link and more cosmic probation. These Bigfoot are fully physical, they eat, they age, they die, They are shy, nocturnal, and deeply averse to human contact, not because they are unintelligent, but because their history taught them exactly where unchecked progress can lead. Also, they are the most likely to be witnessed by us, as they are less able to be aware of other beings around them. This is much unlike the second type of Bigfoot. The second group is more unusual and more controversial. The physical bodies of these beings are not quite described in any sort of detail, but they are explained to be an offshoot race of Bigfoot. The Law of One explains this as follows. The other race is that being offered a dwelling in this density by guardians who wish to give the mind body spirit complexes of those who are of this density at this time appropriately engineered physical vehicles in the event that there is what you call nuclear war. In simpler terms, these bodies function as fallback forms, resilient, adaptable, and capable of surviving environmental collapse. Think of it as the most extreme version of disaster preparedness imaginable. We have the Svalbard Global Seed Vault in Norway that safekeeps our crop diversity. The second type of Bigfoot is a sort of DNA vault that safekeeps the human genome in case of nuclear annihilation. These Bigfoot are physical, but not entirely bound to the same limitations as modern humans. And these body complexes of the second race dwell in uninhabited deep forest. There are many in various places over the surface of your planet. They are very able to escape due to their technological understandings before their incarnations here. These entities of the glowing eyes are those most familiar to your peoples. And the third category is perhaps the most difficult to define and the least likely to leave evidence. It is described as a thought form. In the perspective of the Law of One, and even some scientific circles, consciousness is primary and matter is secondary. A thought form is generated through consciousness, not biology. They may appear visually, audibly, and even briefly physically. These beings interact weakly with our physical environment, and they are not permanently anchored to our third density physical matter. They are not hiding in forests so much as intersecting with them. They can interact with the environment, be seen by multiple witnesses, and trigger physiological responses in others. But they are unstable, context dependent, and responsive to attention and perception. And if encounters with these beings feel dreamlike or uncanny, that may be exactly the point. Once these three types are separated, a pattern begins to emerge. Physical Bigfoot leave physical traces, but rarely. One type has glowing eyes and lives in forests, while another lives in caves. Thought forms leave impressions without permanence, and when all three are grouped together under a single name, the result looks like chaos, which is usually a sign we've mislabeled something, not that it doesn't exist. This also explains why evidence often seems to almost cross the line into certainty and then doesn't. So here's a question. Will we ever find remains of these Bigfoot? According to the Law of One, the answer is not a simple yes or no. It suggests that as long as our timeline continues long enough, remains from the most physical Bigfoot types may eventually be discovered, particularly in remote cave systems in the mountainous regions of the Pacific Northwest. Not because these beings are careless, but because time favors geology. Bones collapse, caves preserve. But this would only apply to those fully bound to physical matter. The others would leave nothing behind to find. So maybe Bigfoot isn't one mystery at all. Maybe it's three, layered together, mistaken for one, and flattened by our need for simple answers. One that behaves like an animal, one that behaves like a survivor, and one that behaves more like an idea than a creature. When all three are forced into the same box, none of them makes sense. But when they're separated, a pattern begins to emerge. And that pattern doesn't just tell us something about Bigfoot. It tells us something about how we approach the unknown. We tend to assume that everything meaningful must leave behind evidence we already know how to recognize. Bones, measurements, categories. But not everything real conforms to the same rules. Some things are physical, some things are conditional, and some only appear when the conditions are right, when attention, environment, and perception briefly align. Seen through a different lens, Bigfoot isn't a failure of science. It's a reminder that our tools are designed for certain kinds of questions and almost completely blind to others, which doesn't make the questions wrong, just inconvenient. And maybe that's why this mystery refuses to go away. Not because it hasn't been solved, but because it keeps asking us to widen the way we look. Because once you accept that reality might be layered, that not everything fits neatly into one category, You start to notice how often we do this in our own lives. We dismiss experiences that don't leave proof. We overlook patterns that don't fit expectations. We ignore things simply because they don't behave the way we think they should. Maybe the real lesson here isn't about what's hiding in the forests. Maybe it's about how much of reality exists just outside the frameworks we're used to, and how often understanding doesn't require more belief, just a different lens. Thank you for watching or listening. I wish you all love, light, peace, and joy. Take care.